Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The morning had started like any other. People were busy with their routines, kids running to school, workers rushing to their jobs, and the hum of everyday life filling the air. No one knew that, just beyond the clouds, something was preparing to tear their world apart. The sky was clear, the sun shining, but then, without warning, a dark rift appeared in the sky. It split open like a wound in the fabric of the heavens, and from that tear, they came. The ships. Huge, black, and jagged, they emerged one by one, cutting through the sky with a low hum that seemed to shake the very air. At first, people thought it was some sort of strange weather phenomenon, or maybe an elaborate government experiment gone wrong. It wasn't until the first city was wiped off the map that they realized this was no accident, no freak event. This was an invasion. New York, Tokyo, Paris, gone. Just like that, erased. The governments scrambled, firing missiles, sending jets into the sky. But their efforts were pointless. Every missile was intercepted, every plane turned to ash before it even got close to the invaders. Nothing worked. The world was helpless. It felt like humanity was just a speck of dust being crushed under the boot of a giant that wasn't even looking down. Panic spread like wildfire. People cried out in fear, knowing they couldn't run, couldn't hide from something so unstoppable. There was no voice from the invaders, no demands or threats, just destruction. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the end. But as hopeless as things seemed, there was one thing the aliens didn't account for. Humans don't give up. Not when it matters, not when there's nothing left to lose. The invaders set their sights on a small town in Montana next. A place barely anyone had heard of, let alone cared about. A place so insignificant that it wasn't even on most maps. But what they didn't know was that in that little forgotten town lived a man named Marcus Lane. A retired engineer who, for 30 years, had been designing weapons, dangerous weapons, weapons that the world had buried deep underground, afraid of the chaos they might cause if unleashed. When the ships arrived, Marcus didn't panic. He didn't run or hide like most people did. He went straight to the basement of his old house, where he kept his bad ideas, his dangerous ideas, the ones most governments had thought were too risky, too insane to ever see the light of day. And there, in that cold, cluttered basement, he started to work. For 3 days, Marcus worked non-stop, welding, wiring, cursing under his breath as the world outside burned. More cities vanished. More lives were lost. But Marcus didn't stop. His hands were stained with sweat and grime, but his mind was focused. There was no time to waste. The world was on the brink of annihilation, and he was the only one who could stop it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was done. The weapon didn't look like much. A rusted satellite dish bolted to the back of an old pickup truck, wires hanging out like a messy tangle of nerves. If you saw it, you'd think it was some junkyard project. But when Marcus turned it on and aimed it at the nearest alien ship, the air seemed to crackle. The sky split again, not with the rift of the invaders, but with the energy of Marcus's weapon. One shot. Just one. The alien ship didn't explode. It didn't crash. It simply ceased to exist. Not a single piece of debris. 1 second it was there, looming like a death sentence, and the next, it was gone. Like it had never even existed. The sky went silent. The remaining ships stopped moving, as if they were unsure of what had just happened. Marcus didn't waste a moment. He grabbed a dusty old CB radio, connected it to the weapons control panel, and broadcast a message across the stars. His voice was rough, shaky, but clear. "Earth to the invaders. Attack again, and face total annihilation." Silence. The kind that settled over everything, cold and thick. And then, as if the alien ships had finally understood, they began to retreat. Without a sound, without a word, they turned, slowly vanishing back into the rift they had torn open. The tear sealed up behind them, and the sky returned to its blue, peaceful self. But the world was still on fire. People were still mourning. It wasn't over. Not yet. For Marcus, this was only the beginning. He knew better than anyone. He had scared them, but he hadn't beaten them. Fear was a fleeting thing. The invaders would be back, smarter and angrier, and Earth would need more than just one man with a rusty pickup truck and a broken satellite dish to survive. As helicopters began to buzz overhead, Marcus sat on his porch, shotgun resting across his lap. He wasn't a hero to him. He was just a man trying to survive. But for the world, he was now something more, a symbol of defiance. And in that small town in Montana, the last spark of hope had been lit. But what would happen next? The aliens would return. And this time, Marcus knew they wouldn't be caught off guard. This time, the war would be real, and humanity would have to fight for its future. But they were ready now. They had to be. And so Marcus Lane, the man who had given humanity its first taste of victory, prepared for what was coming next. Because he knew one thing for certain. If Earth was going to survive, they would have to fight harder than ever before. And the war? It had only just begun. It all started on an ordinary morning. People were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the world was about to change forever. Children hurried to school, workers were grumbling about the start of another busy week, and the usual hum of the city filled the air. But then, in a blink of an eye, everything shifted. A strange tear appeared in the sky, a rift that seemed to cut through the atmosphere itself. At first, no one knew what to make of it. Was it some kind of natural disaster? A freak storm? A military experiment gone wrong? But the moment the first enormous, black ship emerged from the tear, people realized this was no accident. The ships were massive, unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Their surfaces were dark and menacing, like jagged blades against the sky, and the sound they made, low and vibrating, shook everything around them. For a while, people hoped it was just a misunderstanding, a trick of the weather. But when the first city vanished, wiped off the map without a single warning, people knew this was no mistake. It was an invasion. The attackers didn't speak. They didn't send a message. They simply destroyed New York, London, Berlin. Entire cities disappeared in the blink of an eye, their buildings reduced to nothing but dust and ash. Governments tried everything. They launched missiles, scrambled jets, and even threatened with nuclear force. But it was useless. Their weapons couldn't touch the invaders. The alien ships were too fast, too advanced, and Earth was helpless. Fear spread quickly. Panic gripped the hearts of people everywhere. Humanity, once confident in its place in the world, was now at the mercy of an unknown force. The cities continued to fall, and as each one did, the feeling of helplessness grew. But in the chaos, something else stirred, a quiet determination. Humans didn't give up. Not when it mattered. Not when they were backed into a corner. The invaders' next target was a tiny town in Montana. It wasn't on anyone's map, not even on most people's radar. There was nothing special about it, just a sleepy town with nothing to offer. No military base, no strategic value. But what the invaders didn't know was that this little town was home to Marcus Lane. Marcus wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a soldier. He was a retired engineer who had spent his career designing military technology. Some of it so secret, so dangerous, that even his own government had buried it. But when the invaders arrived, Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't flee like everyone else. Instead, he went to his basement, the place where he kept his old, forgotten projects, and began to work. For 3 days, Marcus labored non-stop. While the world burned outside, he was busy in the dark of his basement, welding and assembling a machine with nothing but scraps and the knowledge buried deep in his mind. The world was falling apart, but Marcus knew he had only one chance to make a difference. Finally, after days of sweat and frustration, Marcus finished. The weapon didn't look like much. It was a mess of wires, metal, and old parts, attached to the back of an old pickup truck. It looked like junk, but Marcus knew what it could do. When the invaders' ships came into view again, Marcus didn't wait. He aimed the device at the nearest ship and fired. The sky seemed to shudder as a blast of energy shot from the machine. For a moment, the ship hung in the air, its form massive and terrifying. Then, just like that, it was gone. No explosion. No fire. The ship simply vanished, as if it had never been there in the first place. The remaining ships hesitated. For the first time since they arrived, they stopped. The Earth had done something they didn't expect. For a moment, they seemed confused. But Marcus didn't waste a second. He quickly grabbed an old radio and broadcasted a message, sending it straight into the alien communication network. His voice, rough but clear, echoed through space. Earth to the invaders, attack again, and face total annihilation. Silence stretched across the sky, and then, one by one, the alien ships began to retreat. Without a word, without a sound, they turned and vanished back into the rift. The sky sealed up, leaving only blue above. But the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Marcus knew it wouldn't be long before they came back. This wasn't victory. This was just a warning. The aliens were smarter than they looked, and they would be ready next time. Earth had fought back, but this was just the first round. As helicopters flew over the town and government officials swarmed in, demanding the weapon, Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't care about the praise, the recognition. He sat quietly on his porch, shotgun resting across his lap, and watched as the world around him scrambled to figure out what happened. The world thought they had won. They hadn't. The aliens would be back, and next time, they'd be ready. But for now, humanity had a brief moment of peace. The sky was clear, the destruction had stopped, and for the first time in days, there was a small flicker of hope. But hope was fragile. The invaders would return, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. The countdown had begun. As the dust began to settle, and the hum of helicopters gradually faded into the distance, Marcus Lane remained on his porch, his hands still resting lazily on the shotgun across his lap. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, watching the skies, which were, for the first time in days, completely clear. It seemed almost too peaceful, given everything that had happened. The invaders were gone, for now. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. He'd lived too long, seen too much to believe in false hope. This was just a temporary retreat, a pause before the next assault. The aliens were not the kind to give up so easily. They had underestimated humanity once, but that mistake wouldn't happen again. And Marcus had a sinking feeling in his gut that the next time they came, they would be better prepared, more ruthless, and they would take no prisoners. He couldn't let that happen. Earth couldn't let that happen. He might have scared them, but that wasn't enough. He'd seen how quickly they could wipe out entire cities, how powerful their technology was, how unstoppable they seemed. The weapon he had created, as effective as it had been in disabling that first ship, was a one-off. It wasn't a solution. It was a message. But messages, while powerful, don't win wars. The small town of Montana, where Marcus had lived out his retirement, was now a symbol of resistance, a rallying point for those who had witnessed the invaders' attack firsthand. There were survivors here, people who had fought alongside him in the streets, in the alleys, with whatever weapons they could find. They had seen the horror, but they had also tasted the power of defiance. They weren't about to let that feeling fade. News of Marcus Lane's invention spread quickly, as it always did in this modern world. Within hours, soldiers from every branch of the military descended on his town. Soldiers in black suits, their faces hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, flooded the streets. They weren't here to offer thanks. No, they were here with a different purpose in mind. They didn't care about the survival of Earth. They cared about the weapon, the alien weapon, the one thing that had turned the tide, even if just for a brief moment. Marcus didn't care about their offers or threats. They could send all the forces they wanted. They wouldn't take his weapon. He wasn't a fool. He knew what they were after. They wanted control. They wanted to take the one thing that had given humanity hope and make it their own. But Marcus wasn't about to hand over Earth's last chance of survival. So, he waited. He sat on his porch, watching the government officials argue, threaten, and plead. For 2 days, they tried everything they could think of. They offered money, power, influence. They promised safety, prosperity, a place in the future. They even resorted to subtle threats, reminding him of the greater good, of the global responsibility that came with possessing such a dangerous tool. But Marcus just smiled. He'd seen the world fall apart before. He'd seen governments fall apart. He knew what they were capable of, and he wasn't going to be part of their game. The third night was when they made their move. They didn't come with diplomacy. No, they came with force. Black helicopters descended, landing on the streets of his small town. Soldiers emerged, their weapons raised, prepared to do whatever it took to get the weapon from Marcus. They weren't asking anymore. They were taking it, whether he liked it or not. But Marcus had prepared. It wasn't just him anymore. The townspeople, the survivors, the people who had lived through hell and knew how to fight back, they were ready too. The town had become more than just a place on a map. It had become a symbol, the place where the fight for Earth had started. And now it was the place where humanity would make its stand. As the soldiers stormed the streets, guns drawn, they were met with resistance unlike anything they had anticipated. It wasn't just soldiers firing back. It was farmers, teachers, factory workers. Every person in that town, from the youngest to the oldest, stood their ground. They fought with everything they had: rifles, shotguns, even homemade Molotovs, all in a desperate attempt to protect the only thing that might save them: Marcus's weapon. Chaos erupted in the streets. Gunfire filled the air. The sounds of explosions echoed through the town, mixing with the cries of people determined to survive. Marcus didn't fight. He didn't need to. He had already done his part. He stood at the back, watching as the townspeople pushed back the government forces with a ferocity born of desperation. The soldiers were unprepared. They didn't know the terrain, didn't understand the layout of the town. The people of Montana knew every back alley, every ridge, every tree. They fought dirty, using tactics that were as old as war itself: ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, homemade traps. The soldiers were disoriented, and they weren't ready for what they encountered. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting for their lives. In the end, it was over. The soldiers were battered, bruised, and broken. They didn't even get close to the weapon. They didn't manage to capture a single person. They retreated, heads hanging in defeat, their pride shattered, their mission failed. And the world watched. News outlets, social media platforms, and shaky cell phone videos captured every moment of the standoff. The moment Marcus Lane, the man who had saved Earth, told the global powers to take a hike. It wasn't the victory he had wanted, but it was one that would be remembered. The town of Montana had become a symbol of Earth's defiance. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Despite the retreat of the government forces, something had shifted. Humanity had just taken its first real stand against the invaders, but it was still nowhere near ready for what was to come. The alien ships would return. The message had been sent, yes, but it wasn't enough. The aliens would learn. They would come back stronger, smarter, more determined. And this time, humanity had to be ready. Marcus knew there were no more miracles left, no more inventions to pull out of the basement. He had given humanity its chance, but it wasn't enough. The time for resistance was over. The time for unity was now. The governments had failed. The world had failed. Now it was up to the people. The survivors in Montana weren't just people anymore. They were soldiers. They were warriors. They had proven that humanity had the will to survive, to fight, to win. But the war was just beginning. In the weeks that followed the battle in Montana, the world began to shift. People who had once lived in the shadows of fear and despair now walked with a spark of defiance in their eyes. The resistance was no longer just a small town's fight. It had become humanity's fight. Everywhere, governments and military leaders began scrambling to organize. The first whispers of a united Earth came to life as nations began to set aside their differences and focus on the one thing that now mattered more than anything: survival. Yet, even as the world's leaders met behind closed doors, Marcus Lane couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't prepared for what was coming. He had known the invaders' technology was far beyond Earth's reach. But in the aftermath of the battle, it had become painfully clear that the humans had barely scratched the surface of what was necessary to stand a real chance. They had no idea how to replicate the weapon Marcus had used to destroy the first alien ship. They didn't know how it worked, only that it did. And that uncertainty gnawed at Marcus. The scientists working under the newly formed United Earth Command were making progress, slowly but surely. They had reverse-engineered parts of the weapon, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough. They had been lucky with the first shot. The aliens had been thrown off, unsure of what had just happened, and they had retreated. But they would be back. And next time they wouldn't be caught off guard. They would adapt, learn from their mistakes. They wouldn't hesitate. Marcus understood this better than anyone. He had designed that weapon in desperation, throwing together bits and pieces of old military projects and his own knowledge. There had been no blueprint. There had been no plan. It was a one-off, a gamble. And in the world of war, gambles don't win battles. As the world began to regroup and reorganize, Marcus became a reluctant leader. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want the responsibility. But when the world looked to him for guidance, he knew there was no turning back. He had already made his stand, and now it was time to lead Earth into the real war. It wasn't easy. The global powers didn't work together as smoothly as they had hoped. Old grudges resurfaced. Countries argued over resources, borders, and priorities. Some wanted to focus on rebuilding cities. Others insisted on developing more weapons. Some argued that Earth should prepare for the worst, send the rich and powerful into hiding, save as many as they could. Others, like Marcus, knew that the key wasn't in running. It wasn't in hiding. It was in fighting back, together, as one. But that unity wasn't easy to forge. Trust was scarce. Earth had been divided for so long, and now it would take more than just a common enemy to unite the fractured pieces of the human race. And Marcus, though he had saved Earth once, didn't have the answers. He didn't have the magic solution to bring the world together. Yet he did have one thing that the rest of the world needed more than anything: willpower. In underground bunkers and hidden military compounds, soldiers trained. They weren't just preparing for a conventional war. No, this would be different. The invaders had superior technology, superior firepower. The battle wouldn't be won by tanks or fighter jets. It would be won by the people. It would be won by the sheer will to survive. The resistance wasn't just military now. It was global. Farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors. Every person on Earth knew they had a role to play. It didn't matter if you were holding a rifle or a wrench. Everyone had a part to play in the coming war. The aliens would return, and Earth would be ready. Or so they hoped. Marcus knew that the weapon he had created could only be part of the solution. It wasn't enough to rely on that one device. They needed more. They needed a way to take the fight to the invaders, to make them pay for what they had done. And that's when Marcus began his second mission. He set out to find more. He traveled across the world, visiting military sites that were still operational, meeting with generals, engineers, and scientists from every corner of the Earth. His goal was simple: to find a way to turn the tide of the war. He didn't just need a weapon. He needed a strategy. And he knew that it would take more than just the minds of a few. Earth would have to work together in ways it never had before. But it was a hard sell. There were still too many countries, too many governments, focused on their own survival, their own interests. Marcus saw the tension rising, the anxiety growing. The old world was crumbling, and in its place, a new, unified Earth was struggling to emerge. Marcus pushed forward, determined to find allies, determined to make the impossible happen. Meanwhile, in the alien ships, something was changing. The invaders had learned. They had watched, studied, and understood humanity's resilience. They had underestimated Earth before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. And now, they had a new plan. Deep within the command ship, the leader of the alien invasion watched the images of Earth's destruction and the human resistance that had begun to form. The leader's cold, calculating eyes studied every aspect of the battle. Earth had fought back, but that wasn't the real issue. The real problem was the humanity's refusal to submit, their unbreakable spirit. It was something the invaders had never encountered before. The invasion had started as a simple mission, to eradicate a weak, primitive species. But now, the aliens understood. This wouldn't be a simple conquest. No, Earth had become a challenge, a problem to be solved. And the aliens weren't used to losing. They wouldn't let Earth's defiance stand. The alien leader turned to its commanders, its voice cold and emotionless. "Prepare for Phase 2. Earth will learn what it means to defy us." Back on Earth, Marcus was still traveling, still searching for answers. He had seen glimpses of hope in the people he met, in the scientists who were working tirelessly to reverse engineer the technology that had saved the world. But he knew that it wasn't enough. The time for rebuilding was over. The time for preparation had come. The alien fleet had been driven back, but Earth had not won. Not yet. There were still too many unknowns. Marcus knew the aliens were coming back with a vengeance. And this time, Earth would have to be ready to face the full might of their power. As Marcus continued his journey, one thing became clear. The true battle was not just about weapons or technology. It was about humanity's will to survive. The aliens had underestimated them once. But when they returned, Earth would show them what it really meant to be human. And Marcus Lane? He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a leader, a symbol of everything Earth stood for. And he was determined to lead humanity through the darkest hours yet to come. The countdown had begun again, and this time there would be no retreat. This time, the invaders would learn the true meaning of resistance. The real war was just beginning. As the days passed, the world's preparations continued with a grim sense of urgency. Marcus Lane, though a reluctant leader, was now the cornerstone of Earth's resistance. He traveled across the globe, seeking out the best minds, the bravest warriors, and the toughest survivors to join the growing fight. He knew the alien invaders would return, and when they did, Earth would need every person, every weapon, and every piece of technology at its disposal. But as much as humanity had come together, Marcus understood that there were still countless obstacles to overcome. The world had never been truly united. Even as the planet's governments pledged cooperation, there were moments of friction. Nations, long accustomed to protecting their own interests, struggled to collaborate in the face of a common enemy. Old borders and rivalries resurfaced, and Marcus often found himself caught between warring factions, trying to navigate the politics of survival. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Earth's military forces, which had once been disjointed and fragmented, now operated under a single banner. But that didn't mean the road ahead would be smooth. The aliens, Marcus knew, were not the kind of adversary to underestimate. When the invaders returned, it wouldn't be like the first time. They had learned from their previous encounter, and they had been preparing for Earth's retaliation. But so was Marcus. In every military base, underground bunker, and research facility, scientists and engineers worked tirelessly. Marcus had seen their progress, small advancements, but they were coming together. He had spent countless hours sitting in front of blueprints, watching prototypes tested and retested. The electromagnetic cannons, the plasma rifles, and new forms of armor were being developed. But even as these advancements were being made, the nagging feeling in the back of Marcus's mind remained. These were just weapons. They weren't the key. The true advantage would come from understanding the enemy, from learning how to fight in a way that wouldn't just slow the aliens down, but defeat them for good. In the quiet hours of the night, as Marcus sat alone in his hotel room or beneath the dim lights of military command centers, he would think back to the first time he had seen the alien ships. Their silent, menacing arrival in the sky had made him feel so small, so insignificant. Yet in the face of such overwhelming force, humanity had fought back. They had done something the aliens hadn't expected. They had refused to give up. And that, Marcus realized, was their greatest strength. He wasn't a military strategist or a scientist, but he understood one thing better than anyone else: human tenacity. He had seen it in the eyes of the people who had fought beside him in Montana. In their eyes, he saw not just fear, but determination. That was what made them dangerous. That was what the aliens hadn't counted on. But as much as humanity's spirit was its greatest asset, it was also its greatest weakness. The aliens, he knew, weren't just coming to invade. They were coming to erase. It wasn't enough for them to conquer Earth. They wanted to make an example of it. And so, Marcus knew, this fight was about more than survival. It was about making a statement, about showing the galaxy that Earth would not kneel. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the invaders were watching. Their retreat from Earth had been swift, but the command ship's leader had never been worried. Earth's resistance had been nothing more than a fleeting nuisance. The true power of their empire would crush this insignificant planet without difficulty. But the retreat had been necessary. Earth's unexpected defense had triggered something the invaders had not anticipated: fear. Fear. It was an emotion the invaders were not accustomed to experiencing. Fear had been the weapon Marcus had used against them, and it had worked. But the aliens had studied Earth's response. They had learned. They were already preparing for the next phase of their invasion. The alien leaders were no longer concerned with conquering Earth. No, their goal had shifted. The resistance had proved one thing to them: humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and they couldn't allow that to stand. Earth had proven it could fight back. Now the invaders would come with everything they had, not just to defeat Earth, but to annihilate it completely, to send a message to any species in the universe that dared to defy their will. Back on Earth, Marcus and the growing resistance knew what was coming. It wasn't just about the next wave of alien ships. The invaders were going to hit harder, faster, and with far more force than anything humanity had faced before. The technology was being upgraded, and the weapons were being built. But Marcus understood that the war would not be won with weapons alone. In a secluded mountain facility, deep within an underground bunker, Marcus met with a team of scientists and military strategists. Together, they discussed plans, weapons, and tactics. They had one goal: to reverse engineer more of the alien technology, to understand the invaders better than they ever had before. The project, named Operation Genesis, was born from the need to level the playing field. The hope was that by understanding how the alien ships worked, they could adapt their own technology to combat the invaders more effectively. "Marcus, we've been able to reverse engineer some of their tech," one of the lead engineers said, presenting a holographic image of an alien fighter. "We've adapted the designs, but it's going to take time. The ship's propulsion system is unlike anything we've seen before. It's going to take months, maybe even years, to figure out how it works." Marcus nodded grimly. "We don't have that long. We need to move faster." "We're doing everything we can," the engineer replied. "But the truth is, Marcus, we're trying to build something with parts we don't fully understand. Every attempt to replicate their energy shields has been a failure. We're barely scratching the surface." Marcus slammed his fist onto the table. "Then we need to stop scratching and start digging deeper. The aliens won't give us time to build our tech. They'll come back when they're ready. And when they do, we need to be more than ready. We need to be better." The room fell silent. There was no arguing with that. Marcus had spent years designing weapons, but he had never faced anything like this. The Resistance needed more than just weapons. They needed a plan. They needed the kind of knowledge that would give them an edge, that would allow them to take the fight to the invaders in ways they hadn't even imagined. Back in Montana, the town that had sparked Earth's resistance had become a symbol. People from across the globe visited, offering their help, their expertise, and their unwavering belief in Earth's ability to overcome. The symbol of the rusted satellite dish attached to Marcus' old truck had become iconic. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a rallying point, a reminder that Earth had fought back and won. As the global resistance gained strength, rumors began to spread. The aliens were preparing for something far bigger than anyone could imagine. They were not just going to invade Earth, they were preparing to eradicate it. Marcus, feeling the weight of humanity's survival on his shoulders, couldn't afford to waste time. He gathered the leaders of the resistance, his voice steady, but firm as he spoke. "The aliens are coming, and this time they'll be ready, but so will we. This is our last chance. We fight or we perish." The world listened. There was no turning back. The world had shifted, and humanity was beginning to feel the weight of the coming storm. In every corner of the globe, the preparations intensified. Governments and civilian organizations, once divided by borders and ideologies, were now working together with an urgency that left no room for complacency. Marcus Lane, the reluctant hero, had become Earth's rallying point, a symbol of defiance, but also a reminder of the immense responsibility that rested on their shoulders. As weeks turned into months, the resistance grew stronger, but so did the threat of the invaders. The alien ships, their formidable engines and weapons capable of destroying entire cities in mere seconds, were not just coming. They were preparing to wipe humanity from existence. The first battle had been won on a technicality, with Marcus' weapon sending them retreating back through the rift. But Marcus knew that wasn't enough. It wasn't a victory. It was a temporary delay. The invaders would come back, and they would come with everything. While the Resistance worked feverishly to reverse engineer the alien technology, Marcus made a decision. It wasn't enough to wait for the invaders to strike again. They had to take the fight to them. If they could do that, they might stand a chance. But to do that, Earth needed the one thing that had been its greatest weakness in the first battle: information. He called a meeting with the senior leaders of the global resistance. These men and women had come from every corner of the Earth, each of them contributing their skills, knowledge, and expertise to the war effort. Marcus knew that if Earth was to stand a chance, they would have to use every resource at their disposal. The meeting took place in a large, hidden military facility, buried deep beneath the mountains. It was one of the few places that hadn't been destroyed in the initial wave of the alien invasion. A cold, sterile room filled with maps, holograms, and blueprints was the backdrop for the discussions. As Marcus entered, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Marcus, General Teague, the commander of Earth's defense forces, greeted him with a nod. "We've been waiting for you." Marcus stood at the front of the room, his gaze steady as he addressed the group. He could see the exhaustion on their faces. They had been working non-stop, and yet, despite their best efforts, the aliens had not shown their full hand. Everyone knew they were coming, but no one knew when. "The time is coming," Marcus said, his voice firm. "The invaders will return. We don't know when, but we know how. They'll come with more ships, more weapons, and they won't make the same mistake twice." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. The tension in the air was palpable. "We've spent too long trying to figure out how to fight them with our own weapons, but that's not enough. We need to learn about them, about their weaknesses, about their technology. It's time to take the fight to them. We need to hit them before they hit us." General Teague leaned forward, a frown creasing his face. "And how do you propose we do that? Their technology is light years ahead of ours. We can barely keep up with the reverse engineering of their ships, let alone infiltrate their forces." Marcus nodded. He had expected the question, but he had an answer. "I'm not talking about fighting them on their terms," he said. "I'm talking about understanding them, about learning their strategies, their weaknesses. We've been fighting defensively, waiting for them to attack. But what if we could disrupt their plans before they even started? What if we could infiltrate their ranks?" A murmur ran through the room. Infiltrating the alien forces. The idea was daring, perhaps even reckless. But Marcus had a plan, one that relied on humanity's most underestimated strength: its ability to adapt. "We have one advantage that they don't," Marcus continued. "We have human ingenuity, and we have a weapon they never expected, a weapon that doesn't just fight, it learns. When I used the device, it disrupted their systems. It confused them. They didn't know what hit them. We need to exploit that. We need to send someone inside." The room went quiet. The implications of Marcus's words began to sink in. Infiltrate the alien forces? It was a high-risk strategy, but the more they thought about it, the more it made sense. The aliens had retreated after the first strike because they hadn't understood what had happened. They had hesitated. But next time they wouldn't be so easily thrown off. General Teague spoke up first. "Are you suggesting we send someone into their ship? To what end? They'll see us coming, and once we're inside, there's no guarantee we'll be able to get out." Marcus looked at the general, his eyes sharp. "Not if we do it right. We know their technology is advanced, but it's not invincible. We've learned enough about their ships to know they're not completely impenetrable. But we need someone who can get close to them, understand their systems, and sabotage them from within. We need someone who can gather information on their weaknesses, things we can exploit." The tension in the room deepened. This wasn't a plan that relied on technology alone. It was a plan that required a human touch, a soldier who could get inside the enemy's fortress without being noticed. The risks were astronomical, but the payoff could be enormous. "We have a team of elite soldiers ready for anything," said Captain Liu, one of the Resistance's top operatives. "But the question remains, who will be the one to infiltrate their forces?" The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus knew what they were thinking. No one wanted to volunteer for a mission that seemed like certain death. But in the end, someone had to do it. "I'll do it," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. A collective gasp went through the room. The room fell into chaos as the leaders spoke over each other, arguing against Marcus's decision. "Marcus, no," General Teague said firmly. "You're needed here, not out there. You've already given us a fighting chance. We can't afford to lose you now." "I'm not irreplaceable," Marcus replied. "I know this mission better than anyone else. If I don't go, who will? We need someone who understands the technology, someone who can sabotage their systems and make sure we have a fighting chance when the time comes. If I don't do this, we'll be fighting blind." The room fell into a heavy silence as everyone digested Marcus's words. The truth was, no one else had the knowledge he had. No one else knew the weapon like he did. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end, it was clear. Marcus was the only one who could pull it off. "Then we'll make sure you're ready," Captain Liu said, his voice quiet but resolute. "You won't be going in alone. We'll provide you with the best support we can." Marcus nodded, grateful for the support, though he knew it wouldn't make the mission any less dangerous. He would be entering the heart of the enemy's forces. Every moment would be a gamble, every step a risk. But he couldn't back down. Earth's survival depended on it. As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus stood up, his mind already racing through the countless preparations ahead. He knew the aliens would return soon, and when they did, he would be ready to face them, alone if necessary. But he wouldn't be alone forever. The resistance would rise again. Earth would stand. And Marcus Lane would make sure of it. The days that followed the meeting in the underground facility were a blur of intense preparations. Marcus Lane, now firmly committed to his mission, began the process of gathering the resources he would need. His days were filled with meetings, briefings, and discussions about the strategy, the tools, and the risk. Yet, despite the urgency of it all, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of calm. He had always trusted his instincts, and right now, his gut told him that this was the only way forward. The success of the mission didn't just lie in the technology, the weapons, or the military strategies. It lay in the human spirit, the very thing the invaders underestimated the most. Before Marcus could infiltrate the enemy's ranks, the team had to ensure that every possible avenue for his mission was covered. They began working on new equipment that would allow him to blend into the alien forces, to move undetected. They had already learned a great deal about the alien ships, their technology, and their command structure. But there were still many unknowns. The biggest obstacle, Marcus knew, was the aliens' energy shield technology. It had rendered Earth's missiles and weapons ineffective, making the first assault an impossible feat to overcome. To get past the shields, they would need to understand the source of the power, how it worked, and how to exploit its weaknesses. One of the most promising discoveries came from the military's reverse engineering efforts. After countless failed attempts to replicate alien weaponry, an unexpected breakthrough was made by a small team of engineers who had been working tirelessly in the background. They discovered that the alien ships had a central energy node, a power source that served as the heart of their technology. If they could find a way to tap into this core, it might allow them to disrupt the alien ship's shields long enough for the resistance to mount a serious attack. Marcus had been briefed on the discovery, and while it was promising, it didn't solve all of Earth's problems. He needed to act quickly. Time was running out, and the aliens were preparing their next move. The few remaining alien ships had disappeared after their retreat, but Marcus had no illusion about their absence. They would return, and when they did, they would come back stronger, more prepared, and with a renewed determination to annihilate Earth. He began working closely with the lead engineer, Dr. Sylvia Kessler, who had been one of the primary individuals responsible for uncovering the secrets of the alien technology. Dr. Kessler had a reputation for being a brilliant but unconventional thinker, and Marcus needed someone who could think outside the box. "I've studied their energy shields extensively," Dr. Kessler said one evening, her eyes fixed on a series of holographic diagrams showing the alien ship's energy field. "We've tried every possible angle: direct hits, hacking the power source, bypassing their defense grid. Nothing's worked." Marcus stood beside her, staring at the holographic representation of the alien vessel. He had learned to understand the intricacies of alien technology, but he wasn't a scientist. He trusted those who knew more. "What are we missing?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet but determined. Dr. Kessler frowned, tapping her finger on the display. "I believe that the shield itself is more like a living organism. It reacts to stimuli in ways we can't predict. We need to find a way to introduce something into the field that disrupts the balance, something that will trigger a flaw in their system." Marcus nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. The concept of the shields being organic, adaptive even, made sense. The aliens were not just a superior species in terms of technology, but they also seemed to operate in ways that were far more advanced than Earth's understanding of biology and physics. This wasn't just a war of weapons. It was a war of adaptation. If Earth was to survive, they needed to learn how to adapt as quickly as the invaders. "We need to find a way to destabilize their energy network," Marcus said, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "If we can target their core, this living shield, you could disrupt their entire defensive system." "Exactly, Doctor," Kessler replied. "But we need to understand what triggers the disruption. The energy source they use, whatever it is, it's tied to the living matter that surrounds their ships. The shield isn't just a barrier, it's part of their ship, part of their biological infrastructure. If we can find the right frequency or signal to interfere with their energy flow..." A light bulb flickered in Marcus's mind. What if it's not just the frequency that's the key, but the physical proximity to their central energy node? What if their shields only operate fully when the node is activated, if we can somehow disrupt that activation? Dr. Kessler's eyes widened. Yes. If we target the core power systems from the inside out, it could cause their shields to fail." Marcus smiled, a grim sort of satisfaction spreading across his face. The pieces were finally starting to come together. He wasn't just thinking about this as a soldier or a leader of resistance. He was thinking like an engineer, a problem solver. This was their chance. But as Marcus and Dr. Kessler began refining their plans, a different kind of pressure began to weigh on Marcus. The mission wasn't just about destroying alien ships or disabling their energy shields. It was about gathering the intelligence that would give humanity the upper hand in the long run. The stakes were higher now. If Marcus succeeded, humanity could learn to fight on equal terms with the invaders, but if he failed, Earth would be facing an even greater threat. The risk was immense. But Marcus had no choice. Earth had no choice. The operation was set into motion. Marcus would be the one to infiltrate the alien ships, find their central energy nodes, and retrieve whatever information could be salvaged from the alien command systems. He would need to use every ounce of his training, every tool at his disposal, and every connection he had made with the resistance. His primary objective was clear: sabotage their systems, gather intelligence, and make sure humanity had a chance. As the days passed, Marcus prepared himself for the most dangerous mission he had ever undertaken. He would have to leave Earth and board one of the alien ships, an unimaginable feat for any human. But he had learned enough in the past months to understand the alien technology's workings, and with the right modifications, he believed he could board their vessels undetected. The team worked tirelessly to adapt a new suit for Marcus, one that could blend with the alien environment. Using cloaking technology, small components of the alien ship's own energy, and human ingenuity, they created a camouflage suit that could hide Marcus from the sensors of the alien vessels. It wouldn't make him invisible, but it would make him nearly undetectable. The only problem? The alien ships would be equipped with energy sensors far more advanced than anything Earth had encountered. Even a slight misstep could end in disaster. Marcus took a moment to stand in front of the mirror, examining himself in the suit. It was a strange feeling. He had never seen himself like this before. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was the hope of an entire species. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was humanity's last chance. His heart was heavy as he prepared to leave, not knowing what would happen next. He couldn't help but think of the people he had left behind. The survivors, the fighters, the families. He had come to care for them all, and in the back of his mind, he knew that if he failed, Earth would be lost. But there was no turning back. The mission was set, the alien ships were ready, and Marcus Lane was going to take the fight to the enemy. The time had come. Marcus stood in the makeshift launch bay, the hum of the engines reverberating through his suit, now fully suited up in the high-tech camouflage. The suit was a marvel of Earth's most brilliant minds, and though Marcus had once been an engineer himself, he knew that the technology he was wearing was nothing compared to what the aliens wielded. Still, this was his only shot. The plan had been set into motion. The alien fleet was expected to return soon, and the Resistance had worked tirelessly to ensure that Marcus's mission had the best chance of success. He was to board one of the alien ships, gain access to their central energy core, and disable their defenses long enough to provide Earth's military forces with the chance to strike back. He could already hear the sound of the distant ships preparing for takeoff. The sky was dark with the shadows of humanity's final hope. General Teague, his face drawn with the weight of the mission, approached Marcus, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The general's expression softened slightly when he saw Marcus, but there was no hiding the grimness in his eyes. "Marcus," Teague said quietly, "you've already given us so much. But if there's anyone who can do this, it's you." Marcus nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. His mind was focused entirely on the task ahead. He had no room for doubt, no space for fear. The world was depending on him. It was that simple. "Just come back in one piece," Teague added, a final note of warmth in his voice. Marcus gave him a tight smile. "I'll do my best." With a final glance around the room, Marcus stepped onto the transport craft, and the door sealed behind him. He was surrounded by military personnel, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't allow himself to focus on the journey. His mind was already on the alien ship he would soon board, on the unknowns that lay ahead, on the fragile hope that his success might be the turning point for humanity's survival. The ship ascended, the massive engines roaring to life as they pierced through the atmosphere. Marcus watched through the viewport as Earth shrank beneath him. He thought about all the people left behind, the families, the friends, the innocent lives that had been touched by the devastation of the invasion. He thought about the resistance fighters who had laid down their lives for a chance to reclaim their home. He thought about everything that was riding on this mission. Earth's survival, humanity's future. The alien ship loomed ahead, its dark silhouette cutting through the stars. As the transport craft approached, Marcus could feel the tension in the air thickening. This was it. He would be dropped into the heart of the enemy's forces, where the slightest miscalculation could mean the end, not just for him, but for everyone. The transport craft landed with a soft thud on the surface of the alien ship. Marcus was immediately surrounded by a team of technicians who rushed to help him suit up for the final phase of the mission. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, eyes filled with awe, fear, and hope. They knew what he was about to do, and they couldn't help but look at him like he was their savior. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man on a mission. Once suited up, he made his way to the docking bay, where a small airlock door opened, revealing the alien vessel's interior. The moment he stepped inside, the temperature changed. The air was thick and strangely damp, unlike the sterile confines of any Earth spacecraft. The walls pulsed with an eerie glow, and the ship seemed to hum with an energy that he could feel vibrating through his bones. It was alive. The ship was not just a machine. It was a creature, a hybrid of technology and something else, something organic. The very nature of the vessel made Marcus uneasy. He'd studied the ships, seen the diagrams and simulations, but nothing prepared him for the visceral reality of being inside one. He took a deep breath and activated the cloaking function on his suit. The light around him shifted, and his body became nearly invisible, blending seamlessly with the ship's organic contours. But even with the cloaking tech, Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough to keep him hidden for long. He needed to move quickly. As he navigated through the dark corridors, he could hear the low hum of the alien crew moving about. His sensors registered multiple beings, but he couldn't discern their shapes. The alien language was unintelligible to his ears, but the ship's AI, which Marcus had hacked into earlier, provided him with translations. Step by step, Marcus made his way to the core of the ship. He knew that the energy node, the heart of the ship's defenses, would be heavily guarded, but he also knew that time was not on his side. Every second he spent here increased the risk of discovery, and when that happened, there would be no escaping. As he neared the core, a strange sensation crawled up his spine. The ship seemed to come alive around him. The walls pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost sentient, as though the vessel itself was aware of his presence. He felt an overwhelming urge to turn back, to abort the mission, but he couldn't. He had come too far. Humanity had come too far. He reached the final threshold, the door to the alien energy core. As he approached, he noticed something peculiar. The door didn't just open. It responded to him. A pulse of light emitted from the walls, scanning him, as if probing his identity. For a moment, he stood frozen. His heart hammered in his chest, and sweat beaded on his forehead. This was it. He couldn't let fear control him now. Using a series of codes he had memorized from his research, Marcus bypassed the security protocols. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a vast, cavernous space inside. At the center of the chamber stood the heart of the ship, the energy node. It was immense, far larger than anything Marcus had imagined. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, an intense, vibrant glow that seemed to pull at his very being. This was it. The key to the invaders' power, the source of their shields, their weapons, everything. Marcus moved forward, his pulse quickening, his fingers trembling as he reached for the device on his wrist. He needed to plant the device and disrupt the core. He needed to bring the ship down long enough for Earth's forces to strike. But as his hand hovered just inches from the node, something unexpected happened. The ship began to rumble, the walls around him vibrating as though they had sensed his approach. The light from the energy core flared, brightening to an almost blinding intensity. Something was wrong. And then a voice echoed through his helmet. a voice unlike anything he'd ever heard. It wasn't alien. It was far colder, far more mechanical. "Human," the voice said, reverberating through the ship's speakers. "We have been expecting you." The ground beneath him shifted, and Marcus knew, without a doubt, that the game had just changed. The invaders were far more prepared than he had ever imagined.